A programmer wrote the code segment below to display the average of all the elements in a list called numbers. There's always at least one number in the list. The programmer wants to reduce the number of operations that are performed when the program is run. Which change will result in a correct program with a reduced number of operations performed? So let's look at this code that calculates the average of a list of numbers. And remember that the average is equal to the sum of all numbers divided by the number of elements in the list that we're adding up. So in line 1, we initialize a variable count, which we set equal to 0. Its initial value is 0. Then another variable sum, whose initial value is also 0. Then we have this for each loop that's going to loop this code in these two curly braces. So it's going to repeat once for every value in numbers. So value is going to be a variable that stores the current element we're on in the list numbers. So we're going to repeat once for every element in numbers. So for every repetition of this loop here, we're going to add 1 to count, meaning we're going to set count and assign it to the value of count plus 1. So count plus 1 is just one more than the current value of count, and then we're going to set that to be the new value of count. So that's like adding 1 to count. And then we're going to assign the value of sum plus value. Value is the current element in the list we're in. We're going to add that value to sum and set sum equal to the new value. So that means we're just adding the value to sum and assigning that to the new to be the new sum. And then we're going to calculate the average, which is going to be equal to the sum divided by the count. So like in this formula here, where the sum is the sum of all the elements in the list and the count is the number of elements in the list. And after we've done that for every element of the list, our final value of average will be the total sum divided by the total count, and we're going to display that. So as you could probably tell, there's a line in this code that doesn't need to be repeated over and over again. This line here, line 7, because we know that the average is equal to the total sum divided by the total number of elements. So all we need to find out is the sum of all the elements and to find out how many elements there are. And this for each loop accomplishes that with these two variables here, because we are adding 1 every time we encounter a new variable in numbers, new element in numbers, and we're adding that the value of that new element to the value of sum. So that way we're keeping track of the total count and the total sum. So that means after we find the total count and total sum, then we can calculate the average. We don't need to calculate the average after every element in numbers. So what we can do is that we can perform this line of code outside of the for each loop. So that means this line isn't repeated over and over again every time the for each loop runs. So that means what we can do is we can interchange lines 7 and 8. This will move the curly brace up here and this line of code down here. So that way this line of code will be run after the for each loop calculates count and sum, and we'll simply just use count and sum to find the average. So that means D is the correct answer.